Did you know that a lot of stonehenges are actually aligned with the winter solstice? And this poses a particular quandary for the vegan witch. Stick around, me and Mishka will explain it. Hi everybody, my name is Dr. Corey Wren. I'm a vegan sociologist, a vegan feminist, and a vegan witch. I'm the author of a book, Vegan Witchcraft. And in that book, one of the things I aim to do is to reimagine the wheel of the year, the witch's wheel of the year, to be more conducive to honoring our relationships with fellow animals. So seeing them as persons, not as food or ritual items or objects on the feasting table, if you will. So what is winter solstice? Winter solstice is simply the point of the year in the winter season when the sun is at its absolute shortest. So as I'm recording this around that time here in the UK, and I'm in the southern part of the UK, so it actually isn't as bad as it would be in other parts. But for me, around 1 p.m., the sun has really started to go over to the other side of the buildings, and it's starting to get dark. By 3 o'clock, it's really starting to get dark, and by 3:30, the sun's about set. So that's pretty, and also it doesn't really rise until almost 8 o'clock in the morning. So you really have quite a long period of darkness. It's a moment of really sitting in the land of shadows historically. There's a lot of metaphors that we can pull from that. Indeed, because a lot of these metaphors, this is one of the reasons you see so many holidays around this season. Sociologically, one of the reasons we would do that is to lift spirits, because we know that human beings are very much so affected by sunlight. And if we have different holidays at that time that celebrate feasting and light and warmth and all those things, it can be very spiritually uplifting and important for getting us through this dark period. But also symbolically, this is a time when we're thinking about that even in the darkest dark, there's still hope that new light is emerging and that new life is going to be coming soon. So it's a major point in the turning of the wheel where after winter solstice, which is just around December 21st usually, after winter solstice, the sun is going to start to come back and the days get longer and longer, the nights get shorter. So in this sort of dark space, this is a time for, historically, in the witchcraft community, this is a time for reflection, for rest. We take a hint from nature, we take a hint from other animals, and we try to kind of honor that low energy. And look how sweet she is. Honor that slow energy and just take it easy. I wish I could say the same. I do not do that. I use this time as go, 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 because we have lots of parties to go to, don't we? Gifts to get ready for people, cooking, baking. And for me also, usually a lot of marking because I'm a university lecturer. But in our own way, if we can, we use this time for rest and reflection. Now, for a lot of those folks in the goddess tradition, this is also, they're playing on the sun energy being very masculine power and the sort of moon energy being the feminine power, or, because we're in longer nights in this time of year, this whole season is considered a sort of feminine season. Now, nowadays, feminist witchcraft has moved on from that and away from this sort of binary thinking. But I think that the history of that is kind of sweet in a way. And I like to think about this time as a time for honoring that femininity and honoring women's achievements, women's hard work. And really, this is a time, it is women's go time when we're in the holiday season, because it's traditionally feminized labor, invisibilized feminized labor. So if we then as witches, as feminist witches, can start to acknowledge that women actually are doing a lot of work at this time. We're actually doing a lot of the embryonic work, the behind the scenes work, the shadow work that doesn't really get seen or acknowledged, but it's important nonetheless. Historically, this has also been a time associated with learning and study, and I think that maybe we could look at that intersection and think maybe we can honor the season by studying feminist theory, reading some feminist literature, and using this time to incubate, if you will, before we emerge in the new spring season and it's go time again. Now, what about non-human animals? So unfortunately, what we see is that with a lot of the ancient peoples, and why do we even care about the ancient peoples? Because in modern witchcraft, although in witchcraft today there's this idea that it's all created, it's what you make of it, and it's unlike institutionalized religions because we're not adhering to some doctrine. Unfortunately, witchcraft still feels the need to pull on old stories and old ancestors and old ideas about what people did back then, just like Christianity, Judaism, Islam, etc., Buddhism as well. Just like those religions, witches look back into history and say, well, that's what our ancestors did, so that's what we're going to do now, even though we're grasping at straws, aren't we? And for a lot of those people who are writing the witchcraft books and lecturing on witchcraft and serving as priestesses and priests or whatever, very few of them that I'm aware of in the research that I've done for my book on vegan witchcraft actually go back and look at the archaeological research to see, well, what did actually people do? Because one of the biggest misnomers is that people ate lots of meat, and therefore witches today, when you look at the major Sabbath celebrations, there will be lots and lots of animal products on the table. And that is absolutely inaccurate. The average person in prehistoric times was not eating a lot of animal products, if at all. So in fact, we know that from archaeological evidence that most people were eating lots of nuts to get their protein and fat, lots of wild herbs and plants, fruits, and eating animal products was really a luxury item that was reserved for the wealthy. It was also a marker of status. So the average person working in agriculture even, so we're moving into more recent times, they're not eating a lot of animal products. But what's happening though in witchcraft is that because witchcraft is defining itself in relation to institutionalized patriarchal religions that oftentimes advocate piousness and going without and asceticism and all that sort of stuff, what witchcraft does in response to that is says actually indulge and feel pleasure, seek pleasure. That is actually our duty as humans on earth, not to restrict ourselves, but actually to indulge. And indulging then, because animal products have historically been so high resource of items, indulging then usually entails, let's see how many animal products we can fit on the table or wear or put in our different cosmetic products or whatever it may be. And so this is actually drawing on, first off, speciesism. Obviously, animals are suffering and dying for this, so that's an inequality. But it's also drawing on historical classism, where these luxury items would not be available to everyone, and in some cases actually restricted from other people. So for instance, in colonial Ireland, people who were colonized in Ireland were not allowed to hunt in a lot of cases because that was the king's animals or whatever it may be. So actually there were restrictions sometimes placed as far as what people could consume or not consume in order to reify social stratification systems. So why is witchcraft so interested then in, first off, exploiting non-human animals, which is a hierarchy, humans over animals? We're apes. We are supposed to be eating plant-based. And secondly, why are we then going after this system that historically was not available to everyone? And the idea here is that this is what our ancestors are supposed to do, so that makes it, well, acceptable for us to do today. Well, there's a lot of things that our ancestors probably did that was completely unethical and problematic and immoral even, that today we would say, yeah, like marrying children off or having brothers and sisters have babies, which is what a lot of the royal lineage did in the olden days. Do we really want to keep doing that just because that's what our ancestors did? So one of the things that I'm arguing with vegan witchcraft is that we need to de-link this idea of it's only legitimate or valid if we can tie it to our ancestors in some way. Like, on the other hand, of course, I do recognize that there is something very powerful and potent in pushing through all these modern systems that have detached us from nature and our old ways and traditions and cultures. I understand that. But using that, kind of cherry picking that in order to say it's okay to hurt animals, I think is very problematic and against the principles of witchcraft. One of the reasons I think also that this takes place is because We have perfectly fine non-animal versions of all of these things that we use in witchcraft for our ritual tools or for our foods on the Sabbath table. But we actively go for those animal products. And I think it's still because this idea that it's added value because it comes from an animal, as though using a soy-based candle is less than using a beeswax candle. They're both natural, but why do we fetishize the beeswax candle? Or if we have a Sabbath feast at the table and we have, say, a wheat gluten-based turkey product or whatever versus an actual dead body of a turkey, most people would say that other one is the wheat gluten-based one or the soy-based one. That one's lesser than and less quality. Why? Both of those are nature. Both of those are natural. But the turkey's body is getting fetishized here. So it's not just that these were heavy resources. It's like it's way more expensive to raise turkeys and to kill turkeys, to eat them. It's way more expensive to do with beeswax candles. What I think is going on there is, number one, it's a status thing. The more this high status stuff we can consume, the more luxurious we feel. But I actually think that there's some magic thinking going on behind this, as though by putting this animal in the middle of this consumption process, that is adding some kind of magical value to it. We're fetishizing it, and that's ultimately what a fetishized commodity is all about, this magical thinking that if we put an animal's labor or body in between these base ingredients that we need and the consumption of it, that adds some kind of magical value. So it's not enough to just go eat the nuts and fruits and vegetables and grains directly. We have to have a cow eat that first, process it through their energy, sacrifice them, and then consume it. So it's a magical thinking, a fetishistic thinking, and then ultimately, although witchcraft claims that it is not about animal sacrifice, it is ultimately about animal sacrifice, because it almost calls for the sacrifice of non-human animals and ritual tools and Sabbath feasts. So that's what brings us back then to winter solstice. Historically, it is true, in fact, that winter solstices were celebrated at henges here in the UK. Not all of them, but many of them. And when people would come, they would bring a lot of their animals with them and slaughter them en masse. So we do have some archaeological research for many of these, not just in the UK, also in Ireland, Republic of Ireland. There is archaeological evidence that animals were marched to their death, basically, to be mass slaughtered in these. And the idea is probably that because it was a rare treat to have animal flesh, there would be a major draw for people to come from all over the country, walking or taking boats or whatever to get there. So sadly, when we look at these beautiful henges today, I always have to have a bit of reflection and remembrance when I enter these stone circles, because I know that they're actually sites of mass suffering and slaughter for non-human animals. So I suggest then, when we celebrate winter solstice, what we need to be doing, if you are visiting a Stonehenge, I think take a moment to remember that there was mass violence here by prehistoric peoples who were thinking very magically about non-human animals as this like high value source of food, even though they had plenty of other plant-based ways to survive and did so for most of the year. Sacrificing animals held very important magical and gustatory power for these people. But secondly, for those of us who are not going to a henge, which is probably most of us, for those of us who are not going to a henge, I think it's important then for winter solstice to, at our Sabbath table, at our feasting table, make sure that we're not trying to replicate this antiquated notion that an animal must be sacrificed in order for us to honor the changing of the seasons, or for us to have a legitimate celebration. We're living in a time now where we don't have to do that. We're not surviving out in some forest or field. We can easily go to the grocery store and get plant-based alternatives. And also keeping in mind that historically, most people were not eating animal products on the reg anyway, right? It's not accurate. And the other thing that and returning back to what I started off with this little mini lecture today, is to take a cue from nature itself. That when the sun is at this low energy point, let's honor that. Let's honor that and sit with that and rest with it. It's a magical time, actually, when the world is so much more quiet, still in rest mode, and we're sitting in much more darkness. It forces us to slow down quite a bit, doesn't it? So let's take a cue from nature, and in the winter solstice season, focus on slowing down, resting, taking care of one another, and not introducing animal sacrifice. It's absolutely unnecessary to do that. But also keeping in mind that we have a lot of free living friends out in our neighborhoods and our natural spaces, and do take care of them as well. So I, for instance, take care of my pigeons. In the summertime, they don't need me so much, but in the winter, it's getting cold. Their little bodies need to make a lot more heat. I make sure to put out some seeds, some good quality bird seed for them. So do what you can, and keeping in mind that with climate change now, it's much more difficult for and habitat loss, it's much more difficult for free living animals to survive. So if you're feeling the cold, imagine what folks outside are dealing with, and do your best to support them in an ethical way, right? So you don't want to be feeding them stuff that makes them sick, and you don't want to be putting them in harm's way. So I have to be careful, for instance, to feed my pigeons in a certain spot to keep them away from the cats and make sure the cats are inside. So I hope that this winter solstice season, you will think about practicing it the vegan witch way and honoring non-human animals, taking a moment to remember all the sacrifice that has happened historically, and the sacrifice, sadly, that continues today. This is a time of mass slaughter for turkeys, for pigs, for cows, for chickens, for ducks, for all these different animals that we feel like must be sacrificed for us to have a proper Christmas or Yule or solstice meal. And I think as vegan witches, we can make real magic if we push through that and actually see non-human animals as sentient beings who are worthy of our compassion. And our lives are actually so much more enriched when we see them as persons and respect them as persons, instead of sacrificing them for what is essentially a moment of gustatory pleasure that's been foisted on us by a capitalist system that shapes our food systems. Witchcraft not excluded from that. Shall we say goodbye, Mishka? Yes. So happy solstice, everyone. I'm actually heading off to a Stonehenge for solstice, so I will definitely practice what I preach, and I will light a candle for all those animals who likely met a horrific end there.